Hi, and welcome to our devotional for today, which is December the 16th. Um, our devotional yesterday did get cut off right at the very end. I think my signal dropped out over at the mission site. So the questions from yesterday that you may have missed that I ended with were, what risks do you experience in caring for others? What can you do to proactively protect yourself from these exposures? And what sort of spiritual and emotional PPE do you need to invest in? Now, today, our scripture is Matthew 25:35 through 40, and our author is Amy Linneman. And so I will share it with you now. I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. Having attended church since my feet barely dangled from the edge of our family pew, I have heard countless evangelistic programs captioned by the slogan, Be the hands and feet of Jesus, or You are the only Jesus that some people will ever meet. In the famous sheep and goats parable from Matthew 25, however, Christ flips that messianic binary on its head, seating divinity squarely in the body of the outcast, the unclothed, and the incarcerated. Jesus is not the benevolent servant in this parable. Jesus is the immigrant and the inmate, the stranger whose views set our teeth on edge, the neighbor whose grief and hunger make us uncomfortable, and the sick friend whose illness reminds us of our own mortality. As we reflect on the incarnation of Jesus, who chose to enter our world in naked frailty, experienced radical hunger and thirst, and suffered the incarceration and death of a criminal, we are challenged to love the strangers, the poor, and the prisoners who continue to embody the holy presence of the incarnate Christ. Meeting the felt needs of others means attending to and believing those who tell us how they have suffered. It means inconveniencing ourselves regularly and unglamorously. During the years when my children were small, I remember longing for a project or a mission that would focus my energy on meaningful service. This parable from Matthew taught me that in the diurnal liturgy of motherhood, I continually clothed naked people, fed the hungry, offered bottles and sippy cups to the thirsty, cared for the sick, and welcomed these little strangers who upended every expectation I had about the limits of love and resources of my own heart. Every time I cleaned and bandaged a sidewalk skinned knee, I unwittingly dressed the wounds of Christ. The disruption of their perpetual need had me tripping over the very threshold of heaven precisely when I felt most anchored to the inconveniences of earth. In my pastoral and professional life, projects, initiatives, and achievements threaten to eclipse the faces of hungry and thirsty people all around me. In my effort to accomplish personal goals, I sometimes ignore the shackled hearts and wounded words of the people serving alongside me. This parable reminds me of the high stakes attached to holy interruptions. The incarnate Christ still greets us in the face of the stranger. On my better days, the weight of my neighbor's need slows me down and compels my compassion. I find that, rather than being the hands and feet of Jesus, I am moved by suffering that invokes the very wounds he carried there. Rather than casting myself as the only Jesus someone may ever meet, I learn to see Christ in the eyes of every hungry stranger, and I feel deeply the sacred honor of sharing a meal. When we choose to embrace the grace of community with the weary, the hurting, and the oppressed, we daily honor the ever-present incarnation of Christ. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you tomorrow.